Good morning.
How do you fare this morning?
I fare well. I am simulcasting.
Yes.
Yes. So
Exciting.
on the Stone Tree Facebook page, as well as the YouTube page, we are live. So
Nice.
you feel like checking that out, feel free. But I'm going to grow the audience a little bit. And if you happen to be on Facebook or YouTube and want to see what we're doing, head on over to Stone Tree Creative and you can see the whole thing going on. It's pretty neat. I feel like I'm back in a TV studio and doing this all. It's going to be really complicated. But
Heck yeah. I'll have you announce it one more time a little bit later on so folks
yeah,
can,
of course.
so folks can have a look once we get everybody all up in here. I will apologize in advance as well. I've got morning chores by myself this morning, so you'll probably hear me making breakfast and getting the kids around. So sorry in advance, y'all, if that happens to be a big mess.
You'll be glad
Or
to.
if I just drop out of nowhere because, somebody has done something and now I have to rush them out to the bus.
Yeah, no worries. It snowed overnight here, believe it or not. It is the middle of April and woke up to a couple of inches of snow. So feeling really happy this morning, that springtime energy, seeing inches of snow on the ground really makes you feel like spring has sprung.
It's funny. Living in Colorado, it's not uncommon to get like freak snowstorms even
Sure.
in June. But everybody always acts like they're surprised. Everybody's always like, "What? Can you believe it? You guys have been here forever. Is this really surprising to you at this point?"
I
But I
know.
know nothing about what the timelines are like for Maine. Is it regular to get spring snow or is it out of the ordinary?
It is up until about April 1st. After that, it does become this kind of like freak snowstorm. So middle of April is really pushing it. Have seen things pretty late in April, but I choose to live here. It's you also, if you choose to live in Maine, you have to choose to complain nonstop. Like it's a requirement for getting your license in Maine, getting your state ID is to be able to complain about things that are pretty inconsequential. So snow, weather, right? Things like that. Complain about them and they allow you into the state. So it's
Oh,
a skill that I've honed over years. I can
so
complain
what you're
about anything.
telling me is I'm very prepared to be a president of Maine
Oh
or
yeah,
to be
no,
a resident of Maine.
yeah, resident, president, whatever you want to be. Like we're pretty loose up here.
I think I'd like to be president of Maine.
I think a lot of people would like you to be president of Maine. Believe me.
All right. Well, we've got some friends with us already this morning. Sisla and Tara, Mariah, Erica, Michael, Tyler, Noel, Kelly, Don, and Carol. Good morning. So glad to see your faces down there. Glad to have you with us. As I mentioned earlier, I'm kind of single momming it this morning with the kiddos, getting everybody ready. So if I do end up having to drop off or you hear a lot of sounds in the background, I apologize. That's just how it's going to be for the first part of the morning. Also, Matt, let me have you make that announcement one more time for folks who might be at home where they can maybe check out how we're doing some tests this week. So let them know how we're doing.
Yeah, so we're testing out a couple of things, right? So all of you join us here on Clubhouse. Well, we're trying to make it easier for people to hear the conversations. So I've started to stream live, and today is really just a test. It's a proof of concept, streaming live on Facebook and YouTube. It's kind of like we do with the live webinars every couple of weeks. I'm trying to do it where I link Clubhouse in as well. Now, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, it's at Stone Tree Creative on both of those for today. If it starts to work and people like it, we'll expand it to all of our channels. But we wanted to keep it small. I don't necessarily have the largest audiences, so it would be a nice, small, controlled group. The good thing is if we're able to do that, we can watch the replays. and hear the conversations without having to go onto Clubhouse. So that's the attempt that we're making today. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how people react, and we'll go from there. But the hope is, if you like those platforms better, or if you want to share it out, feel free. But this today is kind of a test. Get me back into the production seat. And, Nicole, I've got pictures of you on the screen. Anytime somebody speaks, I'll be able to bring them up on the screen as well, so people can put a face to the voice. And I'll just be doing all my clicking and talking and all the sorts of stuff. So here we go. Let's try this out, shall we?
Yes, I'm super interested to see how it goes. I'm excited. Okay, well, let's get rolling, shall we? And I will begin by saying, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Artist's Forge. My name is Nicole York, and I am your host today, joined by the talented and wonderful Matt Stagliano. And hopefully, some of our other regular hosts will be able to join us. We will see as time goes on. But we're so glad that you have joined us this morning as we get together and learn to think like artists. So, for today, the topic of discussion is writing. How do we write about our art, our work? How do we write in ways that help people connect to what we do and what we create and makes them understand us a little bit better and hopefully want to work with us or want to buy our work? I have some interesting insights as somebody who has a foot in both worlds. Obviously, I am both a writer and, well, a freelance writer and an author, as well as a photographer and artist. So I get a bounce back and forth. And so I've developed some kind of interesting techniques for being able to do this, hopefully decently well. But I would love to hear this morning from you, Matt, because I know you also have a background in writing. And so I wonder, when you think about writing from the perspective of an artist, whether that's, marketing copy on your website or an advertisement or a blog post, are there things that you try to keep in mind to help people be able to connect to your work, or to be clear or concise or whatever it is that communicates well?
Yeah, and I think it's important to differentiate, especially at the beginning of the conversation, where you're writing for, right? Are you writing for your website? Are you writing a blog article that is talking about a certain topic? Are you trying to optimize for search engine optimization, SEO? Are you trying to write a Google ad or a Facebook ad, or just explain what you do on a pamphlet, right? All of those different types of copy are different. You approach them differently. But at the core of it all, you've got to have your message for who you are, what you're trying to do, right? So, well, I'll speak about me just because it's me and I know me best. But when I'm trying to market Stone Tree, and I'm writing for the website, it's not about me or my business. It's about the client. And we've talked about this a lot in previous conversations about story brand marketing and whatnot, where it's the classic hero's journey, where you're talking about the client's or your customer's journey with you as a business, and you're trying to solve problems for them, you're trying to create value for them. And when you're writing, you've got to keep that in mind. A lot of us, because we like to talk about ourselves, will be like, I'm a photographer and I like long walks on the beach and I have a dog and she's very, very cute and I love you and you're going to love me and the photos are going to be great, right? So what? Right? No one cares. They really want to get value out of what you're providing. So if you can show them what value you provide, what success looks like when they work with you, whether that's, they trust you, they feel close to you, connected, they're getting, great products, or they love your style, right? What is your value above any of your other competitors out there? As you're writing that copy and you're telling your story, that's where all the tributaries for the other marketing materials and all your other um, uh, places where you have writing copy, where you you start to branch off of that main story. So if you are putting something on your website, you want it to draw the viewer in and you want them connected to your business. If you're writing a Google ad, you've got whatever 160 characters to really make an impact and hook them in. You're going to be talking differently there. If you're writing a long form blog post for SEO, you can't just keyword stuff. You've got to make it engaging and authentic and real. So, when you talk about writing, not only do you have to look at all of that stuff and think about where you're writing, what the intention is, but then you also have to look at it from the client's point of view and who's reading it and what are they getting out of it? Do those things mesh? And then, as you start to write more, you'll read more, right? We talk a lot about visual literacy. Well, actual literacy is a thing. And, the more you read, the more you can connect with other styles, incorporate that into your own, find things that are engaging, right? It's this never ending craft. So for me, when I'm writing, I'm always thinking first and foremost, what are the points that I'm trying to get across? Secondarily, if I'm reading it from the customer's point of view, what value am I providing in that copy? How do I feel connected to it? And then from there, think about how I would translate that story and that value and those points out to the other areas that I write: social media, blog posts, websites, whatever it might be. So that's generally my approach to it. So I figured we'd start there and see what happens.
Yeah, I really like that. I think it's also super smart to start from a perspective of what media am I writing for or on, and what are the rules that are connected to those things, right? So you mentioned, am I writing website copy or am I writing a Facebook ad? And obviously, we have to approach those two things in vastly different ways. Brevity is almost always a bonus, almost no matter who you're writing for. So getting things out relatively quickly and concisely is almost never a bad thing. But in something like a Facebook ad, where you have a limited amount of characters that are able to show up on the screen, um, it is of deep, deep importance. You may need to be able to get your thought or your purpose across in 2 sentences or less. And so at that point, knowing the rules that apply in that situation and how you're going to have to tailor your writing is an absolute key. And of course, that's going to be different across platforms. And we need to know those things. We can't just go on and, barf words all over the page and hope that's going to work. So I really like starting off understanding that each of these different platforms require something different of us. And we need to know that. So I really like starting there. And then I also appreciate that you mentioned the fact that we're bringing things back to the heart and the purpose of what's being written. So if we are writing for customers on our website, then we need to understand what it is we want them to feel and what we want them to do. We probably want them to book with us. So how do we communicate all of that and the value to them in a way that makes sense, especially given the format of what we're working with? But what is the heart there? And I always come back to that, especially when I'm thinking about writing about art, writing about my art, trying to communicate about my art to somebody else. We talked about your why before, and that's a really key part for me in that communication, is making sure that at the heart of all my messaging is my why, right? That it's motivating the things that I say, and that everything is, all of the language reconciles itself to that heart. So if my brand or my art is fun and lively and relatable, then the language that I choose also should reflect that. It should be fun and lively and relatable, probably not too serious, probably a little more conversational. It should definitely reflect that brand and that heart. And if it is, mysterious and dangerous, then I'll probably will try to suit the writing to fit that. And I know it can sometimes be difficult to grasp that we can use the flavor of the writing in order to continue to support the brand, because we are so used to, most of us who are not writers, just speaking in our own voice always. And so, of course, we should be speaking in our own voice, but we want to be speaking in a tone of voice that reflects well on what we want people to think and feel and supports the overall idea of what we're trying to do and say. So I want to add that point to the table. And then later on, I'll also mention a few techniques that we can actually use to get this stuff out, because it's great to theorize about it, but the actual act of writing something out, especially things like artist statements or whatever, can be really daunting and difficult. And there are some things you can do to make it a little bit easier. So I want to get into that later, but also say good morning to Becca. Good morning, Becca. Are you up and at 'em enough to chat about writing this morning?
Define up and atom. You know what's interesting is I don't think I've ever actually really talked about writing. Like, done lots of writing, but haven't really actually discussed it.
Yeah, I don't think I have either, Becca. You know, I try to work with people and work on their copy and help them with website stuff, but I never really talk about it. And just listening to Nicole a second ago talking about tone of voice, right? It's just something that I take for granted all the time, is that, you know, I try to write like I talk. And I tend to veer off of that when I think I should be writing more professionally, and my tone of voice gets very formal and it takes away from who I am. And then people meet me and they realize that the tone of voice is completely different. So I love what you were talking about a second ago, Nicole, about how that tone of voice needs to match what you're writing. Because if it doesn't, it's a mismatch with the personality. So as business owners, if we're trying to get a certain voice across, well, it's got to be written in that voice. And I don't mean like you have to use all the colloquialisms, but be able to have, you know, the real part of your personality coming through in that copy, whatever it might be. But if you're pulling on the heartstrings for, like in photography, a generational shoot, or something softer with maternity, or something harder for guys, it all matters. The audience that you're writing for, the messages you're trying to get across, and the tone of voice really dictates a lot of that. And I hadn't really kind of put those things together before, but it makes total sense. It's almost like you should be a writer.
I know I should like give that a try at some point in the future. Yeah, but it's such an interesting thing. We don't think about it. For most of us, we're used to writing, the things that we write regularly are probably things like social media posts, right? Or emails for work and things like that. And we kind of inherently understand that what we write in an email is probably not the same as what we would write in a social media post. So we kind of do that instinctively, because we're used to the environments that those things are done in, and we don't really think twice about it. But that often leads to the problem that we make assumptions about how things should be or sound. As an example, how many of us work really hard to sound super professional in our emails, and we change the tone of our voice and we try to include words that sound like businessy professional words, and we have no consideration for whether or not that actually fits our brand. Our brand might be super relatable and conversational and comfortable, and yet our emails are going out in a language that makes people feel like, oh, well, here's a very businessy business
I
person.
hope this
And
email finds you
professional,
well. I hope it finds you
yes,
well.
yeah, finds you well, yes. And the interesting thing is, it doesn't mean that if you have a more conversational tone that it's not professional. Professional doesn't necessarily mean the language choice. Professional means your approach, right? And so while we understand this in other areas, we don't always apply it the way that we could for best usage and for best effect. So yeah, just keeping that in mind, that the way that you write to people, they're going to read it and often hear it in their head. For those of us who have an internal narration, we hear the voice in our head, and we're going to make some assumptions about the person who is writing this. And if that person doesn't line up with who your brand says you are and who your work says you are and who your social media videos and whatever else say you are, there's going to be a weird disconnect there. So everything we write can really continue to support that story.
Yeah, I have a really bad habit of this. I change my tone in email, and I think it's a carryover from corporate days, right? Where everything had to be phrased perfectly because of the politics of a corporation. And there's ways to write subtext in certain phrasing, and it's a pain in the ass. um and I feel like I've carried that over into my other businesses. Now there are some places that it serves me really, really well, when I'm speaking to other professionals, or writing to a company that I haven't written to before, trying to start a relationship, right? A little bit of formality goes a long way, but it doesn't have to be over the top. But I think what happens in my business is I carry too much of that formality over, just because it's ingrained in me after 48 years. Just, I am who I am, right? But what I found has helped me quite a bit change that voice is to do more dictation, so that I just speak and I just talk and watch the words dance across the screen. And then I have something that I can edit, but it's almost instantly in a tone that is more reflective of who I am and what I'm actually trying to say, rather than trying to write in some flowery Elizabethan language that no one even uses anymore. So I think for me, walking that fine line between formality and clarity in an email and actual authentic voice has been a struggle. And when I went and revamped my entire website at the beginning of March, I went through and I tried to make sure that every single paragraph that I was writing more reflected my actual voice, rather than whatever buzzwords I thought would catch or what SEO I thought would work. I really wanted it to be more of my voice. So I think when I approach writing in any way, shape, or form, I'm trying to really inject part of me into it, rather than just following proper English rules or grammatical rules or what I think people want to hear. I'm just going to talk like I talk, and you get the unpolished version all the time with a little bit of polish. So yeah, it's interesting to try to break myself of all these old bad habits. Do you find that as someone that writes professionally, that it's easy for you to switch tones like that, or do you find that there's always a common thread of you in whatever it is that you're writing? And I know that's kind of a weird question, but in terms of tone of voice or the audience, do you find that that's your style, that's your voice, or do you really, are you able to tailor it for every type of communication that you put out?
That's a great question. And I want to start really quickly. So Carol mentioned in the chat, she didn't really understand what you meant when you said writing hard, where maybe guys would be concerned. And I know you were using that as a broad generalization. But essentially, the idea of tailoring the tone of your voice and where something might be when Matt is saying, writing, when he used that term, maybe like writing harder. Essentially, what he's saying is that we have in our heads some certain stereotypes about people and the things that they respond to. And often, in the same way that we might photograph men with hard light or paint them, with a little bit harder edges, writing for men also can tend to be a little bit Hemingway-ish. And by that, I mean it tends to be briefer, it tends to be more to the point. There tends to be less beating around the bush, less flowery language, less of trying to flatter or make comfortable, right? There's an assumption that things can be more direct without trying to make somebody feel like, I'm so glad this person is writing to me. I'm comfortable and safe, right? So instead of saying, I hope this email finds you well, it might be, hope you're okay. Like, it could be very much more in line with that type of writing. Is that, I'm assuming, is what you meant?
That's totally what I meant. It's very much the trucks, beer, and dogs sort of approach, rather than flowers and fields and flowy fabrics, right? And that's such a terrible generalization, but advertising has been built on this kind of thing, right? But yeah, the short to the point, small words, easy to understand, get to the point. That's what I meant by writing for guys, because that's what I respond to, right? Absolutely.
For sure. Yeah. And so this comes back to really understanding your audience, right? And knowing who it is that you're selling to. So if I am selling to, women in their 40s who love romance novels, then I'm probably going to use phraseology and words and tailor the tone of my voice to fit that demographic. If I am writing to firefighters, right, I'm probably going to try to make sure I understand how these guys communicate and ladies communicate so that I can tailor the tone of voice to fit that, of course, while it's also supporting my brand. So hopefully that makes sense. As far as our natural voice, there's going to be an element of natural voice that always comes through no matter what we do, because the words that you choose, if I were to say write a very professional email, the words that you would choose might not necessarily be the words that I would choose. That filter that we use when we're putting words together is just a natural part of who we are as people. So there's a piece of that that is always going to stay. But in a way, it's like writing in a genre. There are genre conventions that are understood for each type of work, whether that's fiction or nonfiction or romance or fantasy or police procedural or whatever it is. There are certain standards that we accept. And so we keep our own voice, but we slide into those standards and we write according to what's expected from those things. And I can give a really great example here. ProEDU, for those of you who have ever bought a tutorial or part of the Facebook group or whatever, a big part of that brand is being very available to and at one with the customer base. So these are people like you, right? And the tone of the language that they try to use is very much, this is coming from somebody like you, somebody who started as a photographer and didn't know what they were doing and wants to be able to get better at their job. And so that language usage is always very much conversational. So I find it super easy to slip into those genres, and meet the criteria for what I'm writing. But always the effort is to make sure that my voice remains part of it, and to do that consciously enough that even if I was working for a different company, if somebody got an email from me, they would know it was from me, because that interpersonal relationship is really important. I'm not sure if that answered your question, Matt. You'll have to let me know.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, you're the Olympic athlete of writing, and I'm, more Special Olympics of writing. And I think there's this ease at which, and I've seen it in your own writing, right? Whether it's your books or whether it's your emails or whether it's, copy that you put in different places, on the website when you write your blog posts. I think it's very easy to identify you in that, right? One, because I know you, but two, because there's this consistent thread that carries through a lot of your work. And I think, some people are just naturally better at that than others. I don't feel like I'm natural at it. I don't feel like it's core to me. I think there are people that can read my writing and understand the voice, but I think there's too wide of a gamut shift between let's say website or an email or a text or marketing copy on pamphlets or what have you. I don't think I've really honed that skill very well. I try to keep my audience in mind and the tone of voice and the purpose, which is a huge part, like why are you writing, and trying to say that in as few words as possible. I think for me, it just tends to be a little bit more of a struggle. So I just love listening to how easily you explain that and flow between all your different methods. So yeah, no, that answered my question. That was the long way of saying yes.
No, that's great. Sorry for loud cars, y'all. I have to walk the small fry to school. But yeah, and I think you absolutely just said something that I'm imagining a lot of our visual artist friends feel when they try to write, which is, I'm not naturally good at this, right? And while some of us, I absolutely believe that some of us have a proclivity towards certain things, the ease with which I'm able to do that at this point comes from many, many, many years of writing a whole lot. And it's the same, you know, with photography. If somebody were to say, I'm just not naturally as good of a photographer as you are, you'd be like, well, I mean, I might have a proclivity towards this, but I work really hard to be naturally good at this, right? And it's the same. And unfortunately, right now, we live in a time, well, I don't want to say unfortunately, because it is fortunate. It is fortunate for us. We live in a time where we also have to be all of the things for our business. So unless you are successful enough that you can go ahead and hire somebody to do your copywriting and your blog posts and all of that other stuff, you are your marketing guy. You are the person who's responsible for writing everything that you have to write. And so being good at this skill is a kind of important deal. And it should be something that we practice, and it should be something that we try to do often enough purposefully, as David would say, you know, perfect practice makes perfect, not just practice makes perfect. And I think that's where most of us fall with writing. We have some assumptions that some people are just good at this. I am not one of them. And so we just kind of grit our teeth and get through it instead of recognizing that just like anything else, this is a skill that we can build on. And it only gets easy with mastery, which is kind of sucky because it can be a real slog until then. But I think that's just the process.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And it's not natural for a lot of people, right? Reading is a lot easier than writing. And you know, what I've found over the past, I don't know, past year or so, are a handful of tools that have helped me in my writing. Now, we've talked about AI on here quite a bit, right? And there are tools, you'll probably see them advertised quite a bit. Jasper or Jarvis, it was Jarvis and then changed as Jasper. It's an AI writing service, right? Where you can find anything that you want. You want to write long form blog posts optimized for SEO. You want to write Google ads. You want to write intro text for YouTube video. There's all these quote unquote recipes that you can use. So I subscribed to this service to see for about a year to see if I could utilize it in my own flow. What I found is that for someone that has no idea how to write, maybe English isn't your first language, and you wanted to come up with some good copy that at least gets you started, that you could inject your own voice and own tone into, those are some great services out there. I personally found over time that it was harder to generate the copy and then go back and re-edit it. It wasn't time efficient for me, but it did give me some good ideas. And the cool thing in a service like that is you can write, okay, I want to write a story about two podcasters that are testing things on YouTube. I want it in the tone of Joe Rogan, and I want you to use these keywords. And it will generate paragraphs, as many as you want, getting to that. But you still have to kind of go in and massage it for your own stuff. And I found that it was just less efficient than if I just sat down and started banging things out myself. So, and going through the iterative editing process, which is something that I don't think a lot of people really spend the time on. They feel like, you know, it's a one and done. I'm just going to write this copy and be done with it, instead of looking at the editing process. Am I trimming out all the things that I can trim out? Am I saying things in as few words as possible while still getting the tone and intention and point across to whoever's reading it? And I know, you know, if I start to write an email, I'm like, all right, there's going to be a 2-line email, and then it's Dostoevsky, and it's just this long flowing, you know, multi-paragraph email that I know no one's ever going to read. So I will scale it back. Same thing on my website, right? I'll write a paragraph and about me, or, you know, talking about a certain type of photography, and I'll write it all out and then realize no one's going to read any of this. No one gives a shit. And you just go through and you slash and burn and you cut it out. And I apply that same kind of editing process, not only to writing, but to videos and film and documentary work, or commercials or even photography, right? You look at it and you say, is there too much going on in this photo? Can we strip some things out and still make it impactful, still get the point across? So I think the editing process, whether it's with tools, right? You have Jarvis or Descript where you can speak and cut things out and it'll kind of join all the audio together. There's so many different tools out there, but what I keep finding is that when you can get to a point where you know how to edit, that is where it really starts to flourish, because you can just barf words onto a page and it'll be fine and people will probably be able to filter through and get what you mean. But the more you edit, the more people are drawn into it, the more likely they are to engage with whatever you're trying to do. That could be a call to an action, that could be a social media post, but if it's engaging enough to keep people reading, that's where the return starts to come on the writing. But it all comes back to me for editing. It's not the point, it's not the writing, it's the editing that really matters in the end. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think you have a really good point, and that's actually a piece of technique that I definitely want to talk about, because I think I might be able to help people streamline that for themselves a little bit, doing some of exactly what you said. So I'm really, my baby, I love you. I'm really glad that you brought that up, and I want to I want to touch on that for sure. But before I do, I just want to go in and grab a couple of comments. So Carol saying writing is so much easier than reading. Reading puts me asleep. Reading as research or in editing keeps me though. It keeps me alert because it's more active, which is, I can absolutely see that. And we have to be cognizant of that for the sake of our readers, right? And just as you were mentioning, Matt, the more we drone on and the more we repeat points, etc., the easier it's going to be for somebody just to disconnect from what's going on. So we really want to use vigorous and powerful word choices that communicate quickly. And I can talk about that a little bit later too, but I want to poke Becca some and just see what your thoughts are so far. And if there's anything you want to make sure you have a chance to share on how you approach writing for your business, for art. And then I'll get into some of the techniques that folks might be able to use to make this process a little bit easier.
Yeah. So I love to write. I really do. And I find that it does tend to come a little bit easier often even than speaking. My brain moves a little bit faster than my mouth does, and the voice box needs a moment to catch up versus on paper, or the computer or wherever that is. It's a little bit easier to follow and refine those trains of thought. I did one thing that I thought was very interesting was you mentioned often visual artists might think, well, I'm just not good at writing. And I mean, I'm sure many of us, all of us have probably felt that way about various different skills there. But one thing that I have always felt and loved about the act of writing is it does have a visual language to it. And I find that it applies itself very well, or rather, visual artists can apply themselves very well to writing. And I think the ability to know how to think in prose, to be able to think descriptively like a writer would when describing your work or speaking about your work to your clients is a really important skill, because you can do it hopefully aloud, but also, through things like email or however it is that you choose to do your written communications. But there is also then this, not just the visual language that is communicated through the words, but through how the words are laid out, whether that's written down by hand, whether that's laid out in a blog post. You see this often in poetry where there is a rhythm and a visual element of things through the writing itself, through the written language, that I think is remarkably beautiful and interesting. And I think it's something that people can pay a lot of attention to. And if you are a visual artist, you can learn to use that very effectively to create more impact with your writing. So I don't think that they're really all that different. And even if you don't necessarily have an internal monologue or dialogue, depending how many voices you got chatting around up there, we all speak. I mean, to some degree, right? We have a language that we use to communicate with others. And I think almost anyone can learn to apply that through writing. I don't think it's an elusive skill at all.
Yeah, you said something there that I think touches on exactly what I want to make sure that I cover when I start sharing a little bit about this technique. And that is that we often find it easier to communicate when we know we're communicating with the people. and we're communicating ideas that we care about. So I want to touch on a couple of things there and get into a little bit on how we can do this effectively, because I cannot tell you how many times I have heard from artist friends that they wish they could write or that they can't write. And of course, we've talked about our negative inner monologue a bazillion times. But of course, if we continue to tell ourselves over and over again that we can't, we will believe it. That's what our brain does. The more it receives confirmation, the more it believes. So if you have spent your entire artistic career up until this point telling yourself you're not a good writer, you're not. That's what you'll believe, and that's how you'll behave. You won't practice enough to ever get good at it. So you have to change that internal monologue first. You have to change those unhelpful thoughts and recognize what Becca just said, that this is a skill. You already have the baseline foundation for it because you speak to people. And that is the baseline of writing, is speaking. So as long as you can do that, you can write. It just becomes purposeful practice that allows you to put words together in a way that's not only intelligible, that's the baseline, right? That is the bottom tier of what things need to be, is understandable. Once we start moving to higher tiers, then we start getting into the art of writing, which is things like composition and tone of voice and rhythm and flow and the sound of the words, the way that they go together, the beauty of listening to or reading them. All of those things get into the art of that. And we never have to make it that far necessarily, but we can. So how do we do it? How do we communicate our real thoughts about our work, or what the people who work with us will be getting from us? How do we do that effectively? And the first part of that is really understanding who we're speaking to, how they communicate, what platform we're on, those things first, like we mentioned earlier. Because if I want to write to men in their 60s who live in Southern California, I probably better not write it like I'm talking to women in their 20s in Seattle. So consider that first. Make sure that you really understand the heart of the message and what you're trying to say. And then is the writing part, and that's the part I really want to get to. So the first thing that you have to do is shut off your internal editor. All of us have an internal editor. It is this voice that says, that didn't make any sense, and you probably better fix that, and this makes you sound like a doofus, and all of those thoughts that you hear in the back of your head while you're trying to write something out and feeling really terrible about how it's going, and making you want to go back and fix everything and finesse that last sentence before you can move on. You have to shut that thing off. It doesn't get to speak to you yet. This isn't the part that it's for. That comes later on. Your first job is just to get all of your thoughts out. So just write it and go until you feel like you're done. That's the first thing to do. In novel writing, this is drafting. We generally just blurt it onto the paper, just get it out. The most important thing is getting it out. There's nothing more intimidating than a blank page, right? So that's the first part. Shut off that internal editor and then just go. After you've done that part is exactly what Matt was talking about earlier that I wanted to make sure we touched on, which is the editing process. The editing process includes several stages, from editing like proofreading, right? That kind of thing we all expect, going back and making sure everything is spelled right and sentences are put together well, but also includes rewriting. So when we do the rewriting, that is the portion of the editing process where we start to become clearer and we start to pick and choose our words a little bit more carefully. Instead of saying running, you might say sprinted, or instead of saying, I hope this email finds you well, you might say, I'm concerned about your welfare, right? Depending on the context. So that's when you go back and say, what can go? Just like when in a composition, like Matt was talking about, you're looking at your setup for a photograph or for a painting, and you want to simplify the composition until it is clear and powerful. Other things can be added later, but you need a good baseline to start off. And then it's the same with a bit of writing. What is the baseline composition of this? What are the main points I need to address? And then what are the supporting pieces that will go along to help clarify, enhance, make more entertaining, etc. Those main points. Once you have those, what does the language itself look like? Does it match the tone, the feel of your work in a way that supports what you want to be able to say to people? Is it clear? Have you gotten rid of all the things that are extraneous? And then are you choosing words that really fit your audience and your brand? Those are things that we can keep in mind as we're going through that editing and rewriting process. And the great thing is, once you've done this enough times, your first drafts of things will start to become cleaner because you can process those things. I'm so sorry for the cars, y'all. You can process those things in your head a lot more quickly than you can write them. And so you can be filtering in a way once you have enough experience so that your first draft looks like probably the second or third draft that you would have written before all of this practice. So just doing those things, turning off that internal editor, getting everything out first, coming back to clean up in stages, such as the first stage, you don't give a crap about spelling. Ignore that. What you want to make sure is that the ideas are there. In the second part, you want to make sure that the word usage is there, that you've gotten rid of the things that don't need to be there, and you've cleaned up and added power to the things that do need to be there. And then you can worry about things like spelling. But the idea comes first. In the same way as an image, the idea comes first and all the components that help you tell the story come after that. So those are just some techniques that we can look at to make the process of getting our ideas about what we want to say out a little bit easier. Because if you put a bunch of pressure on yourself to write it beautifully the first time, you're never going to get anywhere. It's just not an efficient way to work because it's not going to be beautiful the first time. You could get to a point where it's pretty damn good the first time, but it's never going to have the polish and the flow and the ease that it has, on your very first go around. So give yourself permission to suck. Give yourself permission to be bad at it, and understand that just like a piece of clay, this thing has to be worked before it's going to serve the purpose that you want. So I'm going to go ahead and shut up and leave some extra room for more comments. If you have any thoughts about writing that you want to share, make sure you can stick them in the chat. If you have any questions, ask them there, and we'll try to make sure we can answer them before the show ends today.
Nicole, you made it. Oh, go ahead, Becca.
I just want to ask, I missed the first couple of minutes, but did we talk about the importance of reading in writing yet?
I had mentioned that literacy is a thing, but like actual literacy and reading, and eventually bringing that into the tone. But we kind of skimmed over it. What's your point? I didn't mean that the way it sounded. Let me rephrase that. I'm concerned about your welfare, Becca. So go ahead.
Well, as per my last comment, Matt, I mean, I just feel like that's just something that can't really be skimmed over. I mean, when it comes to writing, and I feel like often like it's if you like go on the internet and if you're to write how to write well, and you're probably going to get a lot of very technical advice, which absolutely is useful and probably well researched and effective, but I feel like the act of exposing yourself to writing, to various genres, to different authors, and with many different voices, just cannot be understated. And like it is so very important. If you really want to learn how to communicate through the written word, you have to expose yourself to the written word. And I feel like a lot of people just don't read. Like very often, I know a lot of people, they just don't read, and like that's okay. You don't have to have a hobby if you don't like it. But when it comes to developing your ability to write, I feel that reading more than anything else is going to serve you in that learning process really, really, really well. So I just wanted to toss that out there for my welfare.
All good writers are readers. All good writers are readers.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note too, right? So there were periods of time where I would read a book every couple of days and blow through 50 or 60 books a year. Now I'm lucky to get through one a month because I've let a lot of those reading skills wane. And, you had mentioned something, Nicole, a few minutes ago, when you were just making the analogy to a clay pot, right? All of this is skill. All of this is something that we have to learn to get better at. If you want to read, you've got to be able to put the time in to read. If you want to write, you've got to put the time into writing. But that also comes with, you should probably be reading a lot too. It's working on the craft, right? There's a lot of people, and I'm still kind of up in the air about it, about whether or not I want to be a writer. I'd rather be a speaker, but with that, if I want to speak naturally and make my points come across, I've got to be able to write all these ideas down in a concise way and get better at that skill. So it all kind of ties together, but it's just like any other discipline, whether it's photography or digital art or sculpting or throwing clay, you're going to suck at it at the beginning. And only you can make the determination of, do I want to put the time and effort into this, or do I want to hire somebody, or do I want to go somewhere else for it? So I think, coming back to how it all fits into the business too, just make that determination for yourself. Try it out, realize that it's going to suck at the beginning and that you can go through this process over and over and over, but just understand, what are some of the tools that you need to get better? Like Becca was just saying, read more, find more tones of voice that strike home with you, and ways that people explain things. Read more from those authors if it really speaks to you, and you can start to develop your own style. Not necessarily copy them, but understand how they're doing it, how they're writing these things. Why are you connecting with a certain author beyond, someone else? But if you only want to read social media topics on, the Babylon Bee, then knock yourself out. Just understand that, writing is an entirely different craft than what a lot of us are probably used to. So yeah, it's going to suck the way it sucked when we first picked up a camera or a computer or whatever, what have you. So yeah, it's an iterative process over and over and over, because I like being redundant.
I'm a fan of redundancy because repetition helps people remember things. So it's not always so bad. However, I want to touch on something that you just said, which I think is really important. You said you're still trying to decide if I want to be a writer, if you want to be a writer. And I have some unfortunate news for everybody who's in business. You are a writer by default. Unless you have the money to hire somebody to do all of that for you, you are a writer by default. And just like you have to get good at marketing, and you have to get good at social media, and you have to get good at keeping your books, and you have to get good at all of those other adjacent business skills that are required to run a successful art business, you have to get good at writing. So you're a writer by default. You don't have much of a choice in that unless you began your business with a whole lot of side income that's going to allow you to hire other people to do that for you. And maybe you don't want to stay a writer. Maybe you want to be able to get that off your plate as soon as possible. But a lot of your ability to make that money is going to be predicated upon things like ad copy. And while there's a lot of helpful tools out there, what goes out is still all going to depend on you. So just something really important to think about, I think, is making sure that our mindset about what we have to do is really clear, because we have to be able to write things like emails and artist statement and ad copy and website copy and blog posts and social media posts and everything else that goes along with it. The only question we really have to answer is, do I want to be a good writer?
No. Nope. That's a big no. Nope. Sure don't.
Not at all.
If I could
No.
follow that up though, I mean, it would be wonderful to, just outsource your writing, right? But I think there's an element of deep and like authentic understanding, particularly in the arts, if you're writing about your work, that you would have to be very, very, very picky in hiring a writer to write anything for you, whether that's for your blog, whether that's for your copy, whether it's just an assistant to answer your emails. If they don't fully and deeply understand the processes that go into your business and your art, if they don't and that goes for any business, if they don't really understand your industry, the writing is not going to communicate effectively. And so, I mean, the answer to that, and I would say most cases, even for large businesses, is that you have to either be doing the writing yourself, or you have to be able to edit the writing and know what needs to be part of it. Anyway, even if that writing is outsourced.
Well, and you have to be able to communicate well enough with the people who are doing the work for you. They need to be able to understand what you need of them. And so that effective communication is also part of the process.
Yeah, and I think, to tie into that as well, even if you don't want to be a writer, you do have to understand all the pieces that go into it so that you can explain it to somebody else as they're writing whatever piece, right? And that's a big part, Beck. I'm going through that right now with someone that's working for me, is teaching them the language that I use so that they can write some of the copy, so that they can come up with some of the social media posts. And a lot of that is more difficult than I thought it was going to be, trying to explain the language that I use and the verbiage that I use, because it's so second nature to me to talk about things in my business a certain way. But translating that across is a very difficult thing. But how can I expect them to write in a voice that sounds like mine if I don't have a complete and total understanding of what it is that I'm trying to say? So I think that that's a really important point that you made. You're very smart, Becca. That's basically what it's coming down to.
Oh, shuck.
All right, y'all. As we get close to the end of the hour, I want to make sure that if we have any questions from the audience on writing, we are able to address those, because obviously, like many topics, this is a big and deep topic that requires entire books and years of practice in order to be good at. So there's no way we'll be able to cover everything today. But if there are questions, I want to make sure that we address those. So, you can go ahead and raise your hand if you can put out those questions quickly. If not, go ahead and write them in the chat and we'll make sure that we answer them. But I do want to really quickly just hit on a topic that we've talked about before, but deserves a little bit of reminder. And that is that if we spend most of our time with our peers online in art groups or, photography channels or whatever it is, we're going to have a really dangerous tendency to start writing to our peers when we write things. And that is absolutely natural, because those are the people we spend a heck of a lot of time with. And the way that you speak will often mimic the way that you write, or the way that you write will often mimic the way that you speak and who you're speaking to and what you're used to talking about. And so if you need to write a blog post, your inclination may be to write a blog post, and you will go back and read it and find that you just wrote to other photographers or other painters or other sculptors. And unless that is your audience, you need to really take a careful look at the way that you're writing and what topics you are touching on, because most of us will accidentally write to our peers, and then those blog posts are not going to do us any good, because often, and at least in most cases, our clients are not our peers. So that's something we have to be really careful about doing, because it will become a big waste of time and an enormous bummer when you realize you've spent 40 hours writing blog posts that you hoped were going to help with SEO and bringing the right clients to your door and convincing them that you're the right person for the job. And all of a sudden, the only people showing up to your websites are your peers. So really, really make sure that you keep that in mind.
Yeah, Nicole, I just remember in grade school, like
Yeah.
learning to write, it was outlining, right? Who am I writing to? What are the topics? What are the, high level points that I want to make? And then you build off of that. Similar approach, right? Rather than just writing and falling into the trap of speaking to other photographers or other artists, make a note of, it's like storyboarding a video. Make a note of what's your intention, what are the words that you want to use, what are the points that you want to hit, and then start building off of that. It puts you in the right frame of mind. I've at least found that brief outlines like that really help my longer form content, and making sure that I'm hitting the points that I want to hit rather than just rambling.
Yeah, and if for people who find that helpful, I would absolutely suggest doing that. It is a really great way to at least get the broader points and the audience down for yourself. So if you are a person who finds that helpful, I would start making that a practice. When you said you remembered, having to do that in school, all I could think of was how much I hated being forced to do that in class, because I wanted to get to the good stuff, right? Like I wanted to get all the thoughts that I had in my head out on paper. And so having to be forced into this structure that didn't make sense for the way I wanted to communicate made me absolutely crazy. And so I 100% would suggest doing exactly what you are saying, Matt, and then figuring out if that works for you. And if it doesn't, go and try to find a new approach. There's no one right way to get your thoughts out of your head effectively. You kind of just have to find what is going to work best for you, and then once you have a process, start finessing that and honing it until it's the best you can do. But yeah, that can be a really fantastic technique for people who find that they're accidentally falling into talking to the wrong audience, for sure. Well, we don't seem to have any additional questions in the comments. Carol mentioning that technical writers will use 7 levels of editing, which is absolutely true. And it really helps you edit to not get distracted by the mechanics versus the language, etc. And for her, it's easier to spill on the page and outline. For me, that often is true as well for a lot of things. I have discovered, however, that I have altered my process of novel writing when I'm looking at, I have had to pull myself back from that a little bit. So most people who are pantsers, which means that they will essentially write by the seat of their pants, tend to take this approach where they had an idea and they sit down and they go, and the story develops as it develops. For people who are plotters, they will write down the structure and then they will write according to that structure. I have had to adopt some of those things because, particularly with this longer form content that Matt mentioned, if I don't have some idea of what is going to happen, I will hit roadblocks in the process instead of beforehand, where I can work them out and then just write as it comes to me. And that has absolutely sped up my writing process to the point where I can write about 100,000 words a month. So doing that has made it easier. I've had to adopt that, though it's not a natural practice for me and it's not always super easy. So it is one of those things I have to kind of force myself into. But if you find that you're writing that much and you're writing complex things, it can be really, really incredibly helpful. All right, any final thoughts from our panelists today on things that you want to make sure that you leave people with when it comes to writing about their work?
From my side, I think that the biggest thing is, again, I'll say it, you're going to suck at the beginning, especially if you're not used to writing all the time. So just do it. Just keep writing. Just keep figuring it out. Ask for help. Come here. Ask Nicole. God knows she does it. So just ask for that. If you want to put copy in the Facebook group and have us take a look at it, right, and provide some critique, go ahead and do it. It's a pretty clean, safe space to do it. So if you're struggling with a paragraph or you're looking for something or just want to continue this conversation, just go ahead into the Facebook group and we'll be able to help you out there.
Yeah, I'm also going to say just do it, do the thing, expose yourself to the thing. And I mean, it goes for any kind of writing. And when I recommended earlier, like making sure that you are reading while you want to develop your writing, I don't just mean picking up a 1,000-page novel, though highly recommend that too. But if you want to write blogs, you think that you need to level up your website and blog more, read blogs. Find blogs that are interesting to you and determine why they're interesting to you, what it is about the language that is interesting to you. If you want to just write social media copy, read other social media sites. If you want to write things that are poetic and long and flowing and beautiful, then yes, absolutely, go pick up some books and pick up a variety of them. I will throw out, I highly, highly recommend Stephen King's book, his memoir called On Writing, not just for anyone who's interested in writing, but any artist of any kind. It is not a book that tells you how to structure your sentences. It is a book about the creative process of being an artist. And it's incredibly moving and incredibly interesting, especially for writers. And I just kind of a little tidbit too, just thinking about the process of writing and what makes it enjoyable and when is it easier for me. And I really enjoy the process of writing on paper. I feel like it becomes a more immersive full body experience to write things down, things like emphasis and like the hardness with which you write upon the page, things like that. And the emotion comes through very well on paper in a way that doesn't necessarily happen when just typing at the computer. And so if anyone out there is struggling to stare at an empty, Word document or wherever it is you do your writing online or on the computer, get out paper, get out a journal, see if it comes a little bit easier. You might like it.
I love that. Ashanta actually asking, how do we feel about Audible books, etc.? And as a huge audiophile and listener of audiobooks, somebody whose sanity has been saved by audiobooks many times, I have the utmost respect and joy and love for audio. And listening to an audiobook can still absolutely improve the quality of your writing. However, the only difference, and I just want to make sure that we talk about this really quickly, because we're moving into video and audio via social media so much more, there is a lot of emphasis on what we hear and what we see, right? However, those types of media take time to consume, and making really good short form content, which is kind of what is required by a lot of the social media sites right now, that is clear and concise and moving and all of that stuff, is not easy. Also, not everybody will have the time it takes to sit through a video or a long form audio when they can scan and get important information really quickly. So just something to keep in mind, that if you want to do video and audio and things like that for your website or for, other platforms, I think that's absolutely fantastic. However, having something written is always really important because most people scan for information. And so I can scan a page and get the pertinent information in seconds, where it might take me minutes to listen to an audio. I often find myself listening to audio on 1.5 to 2 times the speed if it's informational. Not if it's for listening for enjoyment like a book, but if it's informational, I find myself doing that because I want to get to the information I need. I don't want to sit through lots of pregnant pauses and other things that make listening and reading an artistic experience. So just to keep that in mind, who you're writing for and what information you're trying to get across. If it is informational, it's always a really good idea to have it written. And if you are going to do audio, highly suggest something like what we use here on the Artist Forge, which is Otter AI, that is a transcription software. So it takes everything that we say here, it transcribes it. It will still require editing on your part. What you'll see on the Artist Forge, where the transcripts are included, is very rough because it is an exact translation of the way we speak. And the way we speak is not the way we write. There is a lot of interjections in there. There is a lot of lost trains of thought. There is a lot of all of the junk that is included in the way we talk. We would never write that way. So it will still require editing, but I would include those if you are going to use audio. MJ saying, if I have to actually study something, having audio and visual helps me be able to mark the things. So highlight how things are worded. But so can't sit and read stuff without dying, but being able to listen at high speeds too, so nice. Yeah, there's a lot of ways that we can approach this. But I would always and forever recommend and suggest making sure that there is a really strong written component there. All right, I know we are a little bit over time, so just going to say thank you to everybody who was part of the conversation today. Really amazing to hear your thoughts from Matt and Becca, obviously both always really well thought out and really considered advice, and I appreciate that, y'all. I hope our first experiment with simulcasting went well. We'll have to check that out and see. Matt, you'll have to let me know how everything looked from your side, but hopefully this experiment means we give y'all more ways to connect with us and hopefully start being able to reach a broader audience. So for people who weren't here at the beginning, Matt, maybe you can let them know one more time the experiments that we're doing as the Artist Forge with audio and simulcasting right now.
Yeah, well, Clubhouse is a great place to have these conversations and to have you all join us, but we want to be able to expand a little bit more and give you more opportunities to join the conversation, to maybe watch the conversation. So we're doing a little test today to simulcast to both Facebook and YouTube. Right now, it's only on the Stone Tree Creative channels on those two platforms because I don't want to blast everybody and screw it up. So check out the Stone Tree Creative YouTube channel at Stone Tree Creative or Facebook page at Stone Tree Creative, and check out the stream. See what you think about it. Let us know. Give us some feedback. Did it work? Does it not? Would it make sense to do more of these? Right? This is all experimental. This is part of the creative process. So we're just trying to find better ways to engage with you. So go check that stuff out. I think it went pretty well today, but we shall see. I'm, of course, biased because I'm sitting here controlling it all. So yeah, let us know what you think, either in the group or DM us or whatever. But yeah, I'm looking forward to doing this more and more and getting better at it. I think it worked well.
Awesome. I'm excited about it. Also, don't forget that this month is the April challenge. We are making art around the theme of love. So whatever kind of art you make and however you interpret those words, we want to see your work. There is a pinned post in the Facebook group that everybody will be sharing their work as a comment in that pinned post. So go check that out. Go make something amazing. Share it there. Pin it. Make sure you use the hashtag TAF April Challenge so we can index everything. And then go like and comment and vote on your favorite works, the ones you connect to the most. And then we will take the top 5 of those images and they will come with us into the final live stream of the month. We will use our visual literacy skills to see if we can figure out how these incredible artists have made us feel so much. And then the image we connect with the most will, of course, become the banner image for the group and the Facebook page, as well as be shared in our blog with an interview from the artist and a podcast interview with Matt Stagliano here on the Artist Forge podcast. So we want to share and support and just blast your amazing work all over the place. And we hope that you will be part of that. And in the meantime, there is always the artistforge.com where podcasts and blog posts are going up regularly with great information. Go get a hold of those, share those things, let folks know that we're here if you find value in being here with us. And until then, we will be together this week every morning at 7 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. That's 6 a.m. for the West Coast and 9 a.m. for the East Coast. Afternoon for our friends overseas. Until tomorrow morning, friends, go make something amazing, and we will see everybody then. Bye.
Bye, everyone.